The work that I'm producing is at the moment a single channel video work that is roughly looking at the history of African, predominantly men and some women, who arrived in Australia with the First Fleet. And I'm really interested in interrogating that history of migration and the ways that policy, I suppose, has affected this idea of Australianness and who is or is not Australian. So it started for me with wanting to know what Australia's history to migration was and what the migration policies were. Having arrived in Australia in the 90s, my relationship to migration to this country was informed by the idea that there was a white Australia policy. And then I was just really curious about who were the first, who were the first people from South Sudan to migrate here, and so who were the first groups of people from Africa in general to migrate to Australia. But it's interesting to see that there was a time in this country's history where the majority of antagonistic policies were towards First Nations people, which meant that other black or non-white people had to to some extent be treated almost at the same level as other white folk. My initial assumption was that there would be some sort of solidarity between the African convicts that came here with the First Nations people, but they saw themselves as British first or American first or whatever. My work and my body of work to date has been a lot about colour, texture and vibrancy, and creating things that to me are visually interesting. So a little bit sci-fi, a little bit surreal, but at its core is about challenging notions of identity and history. Being a black woman, I've always been connected to politics. Being a migrant, I've always been connected to politics. And I've kind of grown up in a space where art was seen as political. Having worked predominantly with photography and having become, I suppose, really acquainted with and accustomed to that really specific traditional way of showing art, it's been really exciting to sort of challenge that. And I'm also just really excited to see my work in a scale that I haven't really seen it in yet. And I'm excited to actually have the opportunity and the resources to make something more grand than I've really done before and more collaborative than I've done before.